So without much further ado, I'm delighted to introduce this stellar panel of alumni who are going to share with you their unique experiences of changing careers. I can't wait to hear from Fawzi, Heidi and Mouhssin today. So now I'd like to hand over to our panel chair, Heidi, who is chair of CHS Group and former MP for South Cambridgeshire. Heidi, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andy, and brilliant that so many people have joined us this evening. I suspect I'm probably the oldest UCL alumni here, but let's not talk about that too much. So in brief, I graduated in 1996, say it quickly, doesn't sound so long ago, in astrophysics. I started off, as you do really, or you did in those days, in banking, ended up then moving into industry, had a bit of a eureka moment in 2011, decided that I wanted to get into Parliament, so became an MP in 2015. Spectacularly crashed and burned, I think you could probably say. Gave it everything I could, and then walked away in 2019, decided not to stand again, went back into business, running my manufacturing business before, but also now do a number of roles for charities. I work for the RSPCA, and yes, I'm the chair of a housing association, Cambridge Housing Society. So that's a whistle-stop tour of me, and I'm going to ask the same question of Mouhssin. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with everyone, and thank you so much for UCL for inviting me to share with you my journey from the legal field into the teaching profession and now headship and director of standards for City London Academies Trust. As you probably know from my profile blurb, I started off my professional career as a city banking and finance lawyer before I decided to jack it all in and train to be an economics teacher. Since then, I've had several senior leadership positions within schools, initially as assistant head at Seven Kings, serving an area of relative deprivation, which is an outstanding school. It's featured in Ofsted's report on 12 schools excelling against the odds. And the head teacher then was Sir Alan Steer, who wrote the Steer Review into behaviour when the Labour government were last in power. Before moving on to being founding principal of the NCS, which is in Newham, recognised the second most deprived borough in London. And my connection with UCL is through the IOE, where I completed my PGCE. And I had a great experience during my time there, and I'm still in touch with a couple of my course teachers, which I always think is a good sign. So a quick whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure we will delve into a bit more detail about why and the when and how of the career change in due course.
Yeah, you can bet I'm going to be asking lots of questions on those subjects, Mouhssin. Fawzi, an introduction from you first, please.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Fawzi Abou-Chahine. I did my master's in chemistry at UCL and left in 2009 and had absolutely no clue what I was going to do. So it's nice to see people who had a clearer idea. I then did a PhD at Bristol and carried on the academic career for a while until I realised that it wasn't for me. And happy to go into the details, but eventually I realised that the career opportunities just aren't there. Financially, it's quite challenging to sustain a stable career. And then I realised actually what I wanted is to understand how you can apply a lot of the science that I'd learnt into industry and generate real impact for people, whether that's creating products that improve how hospitals work or detect impurities in food or wherever it is. And then I quickly realized I had no clue how businesses worked, and thus ensued a steep learning curve on learning very fundamental concepts. Now I'm in a position where I can interview senior leaders in companies, challenge them on ideas, write technical and commercial reports for them, things I never thought I would be doing, things I never probably could do when I first started out. And what I've learned is you have to respond to opportunities and challenges as they come. One of them is, of course, the pandemic. Others may be financial challenges. And I think it's very personal. But what I will leave you with is there shouldn't be too much shame or regret. And I think it's very great to hear that Heidi introduced herself with, she ran for MP, didn't work, moved on. I think that's the tone we should be setting.
You're absolutely, Fawzi, and it's funny enough because I've written a couple of notes just to conclude us today. And what I've written down and highlighted is, don't be scared, you've got one life. And that really is, I think, I'm hoping the most important thing that everybody will take away from here today. So when you look, Fawzi, then at the decisions you made, and you've obviously found you're now the right shaped peg in the right shaped hole, whereas you perhaps weren't to start with. In hindsight, do you think you could have made that decision any more quickly, or did it need to be that you kind of worked your way through it to realise what you wanted to do instead?
I would say I didn't have the right information to make sensible decisions, or rather the right decisions. I think it would be fair to say the majority of people here are very bright if they went to UCL, but that probably, I confuse that with being smart with being not being ignorant of how the world worked. And I think that's what was the realization later on in life for me.
Thanks. And from your point of view, Mouhssin, so you again had a very big change. Some might say, a little bit like me, perhaps, oh, got a job in banking, well, you've made it. You were there in the city as a lawyer. That must be a lot of people's dream, but you walked away from that. So what was it for you that prompted you to change?
Well, first of all, it was my father's dream. I was either
That's often the way, isn't it?
I had three choices. I was either going to be law, medicine, or engineering, and I wasn't good at medicine or engineering, so it was chosen for me to do law. And I must admit, I did enjoy it, and I do enjoy the legal field. But I had immigrant parents who had this supercharged mentality about taking advantage of the education system in the UK. And whilst they weren't educated themselves, what they knew full well was that they wanted their children to be educated, because they understood that that was the springboard to success. And like many parents of that generation, really pushed their children to excel academically. And I think because ultimately that was a way in which you could lift yourself out of poverty, and careers like medicine, law were lucrative in that sense. But I think for me, the realization when I was working in the legal field was, yes, you can benefit from a state education and get to those places, but there weren't too many people like me. And when I say that, I wasn't not talking about the color of my skin so much, but I'm talking about the social class. A working class boy from East London who works at a city law firm, and most of my peers were grammar school educated or private school educated. And I started to really see the disparity between a comprehensive state education in a deprived area with lots of challenges, and yet all these young people, all these professionals now who had the privileges in life because of their middle class parents, all of the cultural, social capital that comes with that. So I decided one day that to do the right thing, in my view, which is a jacket in, and see if I could do my part in terms of supporting state school education, recognizing the challenges that people from an area like mine might face. So I decided to go back to the neighborhood that I grew up in and really elevate the curriculum, really say to young people that it's possible for you to achieve, and be unashamedly ambitious for our young people. So yeah, I think the whole idea about the moral imperative for me was really important.
And I'm going to ask this question in a second to Fawzi as well, but just leading on from that, Mouhssin, you joke and there's humour there about your dad and your parents, but I've no doubt this was a difficult decision for you. How much did what they might think, or what other people, your peers, your colleagues, your family might think, did that weigh on your mind at all when you made that decision?
No, it didn't actually, because I think I had that conviction in myself. And I think what you said at the start, you live one life, and I didn't want to get to the end of it and have doubts about what I wanted to do. And I could see myself, yes, you could have all of the financial trappings that come with a city lawyer. You could climb the ladder, become partner and all the rest of it, and have the material advantages. But it wasn't that sense of self-satisfaction, being able to really find something rewarding. And I get paid to go and teach young people. I find that almost, I love my job. It's fantastic to work with a group of people who have ambitious students who want to educate the next generation. I think that's a privilege and an honor to be able to do that.
That's really inspiring. Fawzi, what about you? Was it as a light bulb a moment for you, or did you have other people or other factors that you had to kind of factor in when you were deciding to make that change?
Well, I actually responded to a lack of opportunities in academia. So that actually took me to a journey where I struggled to present myself in the way that industry needed in order to be successful, to get jobs actually. I think eventually I realized that industry communicates in a very different way to academia, and that is something that certainly at the time wasn't talked about. It's something that you know, you can see Twitter handles on it now, but Twitter sadly didn't exist really when I was looking for work. So then what I decided to do was write about those experiences and share the challenges of going from an academic institution to industry, the pitfalls, how you use different language, how to understand what business is all about. So I talk about it at, you know, universities, and I've written a book about it. Unfortunately, I didn't have that guidance. So that's how I went about it.
Sounds like it must have taken a lot of courage. You know, you're very honest about, you know, there were things that you literally knew nothing about. I mean, I felt like that a lot of times in my career. Probably not a bad thing that when I arrived in Westminster, I was so clueless, I didn't know what whips were or what they did, which in hindsight was probably quite fortunate because I decided to mostly ignore them. But there can be, as you make those transitions, there can be really, God, it was safer there. Maybe I didn't enjoy it so much, but at least I knew what I was doing. How did you cope with that? Realizing you were a little bit flailing, I guess, and crumbs, I really don't know how to do this, but I'm going to try.
Yes, how did I? I think I found it very difficult, to be honest. I think it's very isolating, and yes, and it is something that is embarrassing to talk about, but equally, I think the whole point of this is to demonstrate that it's not easy for everyone, and actually by being able to stand up and say, I have some difficulty, not being afraid to ask for help, is the way to resolve that. And I think probably I was a little afraid to ask for help because it can be quite embarrassing. How is this seemingly smart person unable to do something so straightforward as find a job? I should say that I was looking for work close after a global financial meltdown, which I hadn't really realized was going to be impactful, which I think we're about to go through again.
Just for a little bit of joy there. I'm going to come back to that actually, because that's an important thing. External events, sometimes even if you've got the best plan in the world, other things can come and knock you off course. But that learning from your mistakes, from being out your comfort zone, I'm sure Mouhssin will tell us in a moment, as a teacher, that's absolutely how you learn. If you're just doing the same thing all the time, you don't grow and you don't develop and you don't acquire new skills. Mouhssin, how hard was it for you finding yourself in an environment where you were suddenly back to basics and learning again?
Yeah, I think for me, I left the legal profession with one goal and one aim. Was I wanted to run schools. That was my objective, because I thought in my head I had a vision and a plan about how I think state education should be run. And I went to school with lots of really smart kids who, because of their backgrounds or their circumstances, did not fulfill their potential. And that had nothing to do with ability. It had to do with opportunity and who you were surrounded with, your friend circle, and all of those things. So I never had any doubts in my mind about what I wanted to do. But then I worked exceptionally hard, because I constantly knocked on the door of my head teacher saying, I want to do this. And every opportunity for learning, I was trying to throw myself into it. And I took a significant pay cut to move from law into teaching, and that's another area which I'm sure we'll probably touch on, because I have lots of other sort of lawyers ring me up or connect on LinkedIn and say, I want to teach. My question to them was, are you willing to give up your salary and work for £28,000? Do you love it that much? And I understand there is context and lots of other financial restrictions that come with that, but ultimately I was single-minded and resolute about what I wanted to do, and therefore I threw myself into it. But again, you know, you need to have a really good support network. I found head teachers and I found deputies who liked my attitude, and they were willing to give up their time and support me in that adventure. So I think even if you change careers and you show that appetite, I think people are always there to help and support you.
Talk to me about the resilience that you need, because even with all the best enthusiasm in the world, things are going to go wrong, and there will be those dark moments where you think, for God, I've made a mistake here. I had a lot of those in Parliament in the early days. I have to tell you, what am I doing here? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, the dark nights of the soul, staying up all night and not sleeping much because you're worried about things. I think, again, that comes from experience and having what your objective is as your North Star. Putting things into perspective, I think I've always done that pretty well. You know, I played semi-professional sports as well, and I think that helped me as well, because you tend to be in positions of where you're under pressure a lot as a team and as individuals. And I learned coping mechanisms. So under pressure, I would say things to myself like, I'm actually going to enjoy this moment rather than it being fearful. So I think you learn these certain, you learn these tricks, mental gymnastics, that you are able to silence some of those voices that come into your head when you either face imposter syndrome or you're under pressure. And I think that helps you get through it. I think perspective is huge as well. Understanding that sometimes when you're struggling or you fall over, there's learning opportunities in that, and therefore you don't appreciate your success as much unless you go through those difficult times. So I always think, even if I have those difficult times, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm going to learn something from this, and by the end of it, I'm going to be stronger and better for it.
I bet he does have dark days, don't you think, Fawzi? I can't believe he's this positive all the time. It's amazing. How did you cope with that, if you had kind of bad days?
I think actually I probably didn't realise it at the time, but I think I became depressed, and I don't think it was something that I could have easily talked to anyone. I think, well, for a start, you know, I was living at home, and my parents weren't educated to higher education at all. So talking about the specific challenge, it wasn't really easily relatable to them. And there's only so much that, you know, friends can do, and I think everyone skirts around it. I think now positive changes towards talking about mental health have been made, but not as much perhaps as we could go. But certainly I found the things that helped were exercising, even slight bits of exercise, going outside, seeing the sunshine, avoiding sad music. It's so much fun to wallow in your own misery, but it's very toxic as well. And I think some of the things I see now on social media is how everyone is amazing at everything, and everyone wants to talk about how brilliant they're, you know, whether it's their kitchen or skills, but that's a little bit toxic as well. And I think I've really been able to ground myself lately, because I've got a baby daughter, and I now begin to recognize that there's so much of the world she doesn't understand, and I can now think back to all the things that I didn't know, even as a, you know, smart 20 something, whatever I was. Someone, I can't remember who just said it, and maybe it was Mouhssin, but you have to fall over in order to recognize the what you're doing by standing up is actually quite an achievement. So I think it's a relative thing. So at the end of it, when I was able to finally get a job and fix the mistakes that I recognized, I was able to appreciate what I'd gone through.
So talk to me about the positives then, because I think it's right. Some of this is tough, you know, making decisions to change. It is going to be bumpy along the way, but coming out the other side, looking back now, how life is, how important is mental contentment, self-satisfaction, work-life balance, whatever you might want to call it, motivators. Now you're in you know, you are now your square peg in your square hole. You found where you're meant to be for now. Who knows, that might change again.
Indeed.
How does that feel now? How much does that should people be thinking about the benefits of that when they're thinking about changing career?
It's hard to really understand it, but yes, that is right. I think satisfaction comes from inside, but being able to, I think it takes confidence. It takes a while. I think if someone tells me I've done something wrong now, I don't jump immediately and think I'm awful. Whereas perhaps previously I would. I now recognise that the feedback that they're giving me is this specific piece of work. Perhaps there's a problem with it somehow, and it's not necessarily me that's the issue. And I think just exposing ourselves to environments that challenge you to think differently, that's the way forward. And so to summarise that, do lots, fall lots, learn lots, and that's the way forward. Don't be afraid of criticism.
It's life, isn't it? Life isn't smooth. Mouhssin, you have had a big career change. It sounds like being a lawyer wasn't bad. You enjoyed it. You were good at it. But talk to us about how life feels now and how that sense of self-satisfaction, how important that is to you in your job and what you do now.
Well, I think it's immensely satisfying. You know, I said at the start, I have the privilege of working with some remarkable young people and some amazing colleagues and professionals. And I think you know, having the ability to motivate adults in terms of an organization, motivate students, and to be able to see the realization of all their hard work, you can't put a price on that. And to see things like results day, when you're seeing the young people who celebrate their success, and that's great, because you remember the conversations in the corridor where a student might say, look, I don't feel that confident, and you have that conversation about motivating them. That relationship that you have in schools is significant, because I think with law, it's very much transactional. Profit motive is always there, fine, no issues with that. But this is a different type of business. It's a relationship business. And what you remember the most at the end of it is when you see young people after they've graduated, or you bump into them in the street and they talk about how much they've progressed and how much they've learned. And I think that particular aspect of teaching for me has always been fundamentally rewarding. And also seeing them develop the confidence to go from areas where they may have not seen people like them succeed, and then go to these places and do well and thrive. And that's the other thing I wanted to make sure, that they didn't feel as though they were out of place in these institutions. And I think organizations over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years done amazing things about trying to make it a lot more inclusive and welcoming, and being yourself in these institutions. So yeah, I think, as I said, the moral imperative for me is always drives my thinking and my decision making around schools.
And what I'm hearing there is actually that the job, the way it motivates you now, it's more than just about you. It's about your impact on others and helping others be the best they can be. It's also about the team that's around you and how you achieve those things together. Certainly, when I look back at in my career, in all the various jobs I've had, it's been the best when it's been a team success and you've done things together. I don't want to be in a dark room on my own making decisions. I want to see other people thrive as a consequence. One of my best parts of being an MP was towards the end, when I was bringing the Green Party, the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, the Independents together to stand down for each other and compromise in seats at a general election to try and, without getting political, but, for me, it was important to try and get that chance of a second referendum. And getting people to compromise and work together. I absolutely loved that. So would it be right to say that you described the law as quite transactional? So for you, satisfaction comes in the working with others and influencing them, being a positive effect on others.
Yeah, I would say that, leading any organization or leading a group of people, whether that's in charity or any sector, again, is an honor and a privilege and a responsibility. people leave organizations because of the managers that they have, not necessarily always because of the job. And the responsibility of people in leadership to create safe spaces for people to come in and thrive and succeed and enjoy their work, to find meaning in their work. I think sometimes we don't talk about that particular aspect of it, and I think this generation definitely, they talk a lot more about what is your why should I come and work for you, what do you stand for, what do you represent? And I think that's quite important in terms of galvanizing other professionals around and coalescing around a vision about more than just profit, for example, or more than just getting academic grades, but about social mobility and really transforming the landscape. And you can get passionate about those kind of ideas and concepts, and it becomes easier to bring people around to do that. But at the same time, the day-to-day minutiae of working in these institutions, about developing those relationships with professionals, ensuring that you develop trust and belonging, is also crucial to make sure they feel also that they're fulfilling what they want to achieve out of their careers.
So two different worlds, law to education and academic excellence and research into industry transferable. Transferable is the word there. Perhaps Fawzi first, and then we'll come on to Mouhssin. So different worlds, but there must have been transferable skills, and maybe you didn't realise you had them at the time, but in hindsight you do. What were the things that you kind of took with you for the journey? Because that will help, I think, people realise that they can be brave and they can move into different sectors, into different roles, because actually some of the good stuff I can take with me, that's going to be useful there too. How did that kind of work for you, Fawzi?
Yeah, I think, eventually you're right. I did recognise there's transferable skills there. So on the surface, I viewed myself as just a chemist, but actually I was a person who had all sorts of skills, who also could do chemistry. So whether it was arranging lots of experiments, that's a way I developed skills that I could manage projects. So that's a really simple way to kind of present that as an example. Understanding complex ideas in the lecture, well, that's an ability to communicate difficult ideas, whether that's the law, tax regulations. Sometimes I have to explain that to clients. Taking that difficult piece of information, breaking it down to a coherent, sensible, easy to understand way, that's again a skill that you learn as part of the academic world, and it's really easy to introduce that. So there are loads of transferable skills, and I can tell you all of them, but it's difficult sometimes to see. So a good tip would be to look at what you have achieved, the audience, and then see, well, where can I apply that? Removing that, the kind of on the surface it's technical, but where else can I apply that? Who in industry would really value this, and then you could apply there.
I think that's massively important, because it's sometimes easy, isn't it, to get kind of lost in your own world and go, well, this is specialist, this doesn't apply to anything else. But you're absolutely right, that ability to take complex topics and explain them in words that others will understand. It is a different language, isn't it? And industry particularly really values that. Mouhssin, what about you? Transferable skills from law into teaching and inspiring the next generation.
Yeah, I think something similar. In the legal field, you had to be able to convey complex ideas in a rudimentary manner to so people can understand. And I think it's similar when I first started teaching, is about how can I make certain concepts and ideas, academic concepts and ideas, break it down so that it's digestible initially, and then increase the complexity, because what you don't want to be doing is dumbing down. And that's what we talked about earlier about, we're teaching kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, they're not going to understand it. And I think was what I was trying to remove, but yet at the same time still having the foundational knowledge, and then elevating up and elevating the curriculum so that they are having a rich body of knowledge, akin to anyone from any other grammar or independent school. But then I think for me, as I moved up the hierarchy, I found that my legal background became even more pertinent, because in law, you're constantly trying to mitigate risk for clients, and schools are full of risks all the time. sometimes, you know, don't look down as to what potentially could happen in school. So I think that kind of mindset helped, because you know, you're thinking ahead and you're trying to put in policies and procedures, and as you move up, you tend to do more of that. The finance element of it, you know, most teachers, if you go straight from university into teaching career, you won't be grappling with the finance, the legal, the HR. Whereas I did seats in HR, I did finance, I did lots of sort of complex stuff. So I think those kind of the complexity of running a school organization, because of my legal background, became a bit more manageable and easier for me to be able to overcome, and that hurdle was slightly easier than maybe somebody who didn't have that similar background.
So what advice would you give people listening this evening who might be thinking, oh, am I brave enough to do that? In terms of doing your research to think about, you know, is this the big change, it's the right change for me? What would you recommend to them as a kind of a shopping list of things that they should consider? Do you want to start first, Mouhssin, and then I'll come to Fawzi?
Yeah, I'll attempt to give maybe some advice, but I'm probably the wrong person for this, and I'll tell you why. Because I sort of jumped into teaching. I knew I wanted to teach. I went in the next day, handed in my resignation without the PGC or a job. So I was quite spontaneous in the way that I did that. So I think, as I said, I knew in myself that I wanted to do something different and leave a legacy in that sense and make a difference. So that drove the emotional side drove my decision, and then the rationality of it started to kick it afterwards. But I think I would like to go back to what you said at the start. We have a limited time on this planet, and we want to do something that either leaves a legacy or has an impact. And I think people need to ask themselves, what do you want to do? And that was the question I was asking myself. That on my deathbed, what is it that I want to say in terms of my professional career that I've achieved? And in terms of being brave, do I want to look back and be somebody that's full of regrets and saying, I didn't do this and I didn't do that? Or would I rather be someone who said, I tried all these things, I succeeded at some, I failed at others? That to me seemed a better position for me to be in than to say, you coward, you didn't do anything in your life and now you're regretting it. So regret was the biggest thing for me. In terms of certain sort of questions to think about for this, I think asking about, you know, what motivates you, what your loved one thinks and how will they be affected by your decision, I think is definitely something to consider. I think depending on your role, are you content beginning again and working your way up? Some of the things we talked about, you know, will the loss of status impact you? And why not now? What's stopping you? I think some of those questions are worth posing and contemplating.
And what about for you, Fawzi? What advice would you give? And also perhaps a slightly subtler question. How do you know if it's time to really leap out and do something totally different? Or is it just this organisation I need to change, or just this particular role? Because I'm a bit of a baby out with the bathwater person. I suspect I'd get on very well with Mouhssin. Some of my decisions have been cracking, others less so. But at least you lived life and you gave it a go. But, you know, were some of them a little bit too bold? How do you tell the difference, Fawzi, in terms of making, you know, what size of decision you should make?
Yeah, I think, you know, people move for all sorts of reasons. I think, you know, I've left many times. Sometimes it was the right thing to do. I've worked with people who are absolutely awful, and I don't say that lightly. So it wasn't the right thing for me to do, to stay there. Otherwise, I would have just, you know, had a mental breakdown or something. You know, I just didn't enjoy it. Other times, I've left a company where I've had an amazing time working with people. I just didn't have the opportunity to grow. So early on in my career, I recognized I had my first taste of the commercial world, and I just wanted to deep dive into learn how to sell properly. And I just wasn't getting that at the company that I was working at, and there weren't any opportunities because it's just the nature of the work. So I left on very good terms, and I continued to send opportunities their way. So you can leave on good and bad ways. I think what I find now is if I'm not being given the opportunities to grow and they aren't available, I will try and find them in other ways. So some of the things I continue to learn, and I think that's one of the steps that I missed when I was earlier in my career. So for example, I'm trying to learn financial literacy. So I study in my spare time, and that's something that I'm hoping will allow me to leap, go in the right direction in the coming years. So I recognise a gap that I need. It's inadvisable for me to move just yet, but I'm creating the opportunities so that in the future I can continue to travel. So now I have a little bit more control of the direction, whereas perhaps earlier I was just responding to needs reactively rather than being proactive.
And you're right, it can be both of that, can't it? Sometimes it can just be bubble along quietly, bide your time, pick up other skills that are going to be useful, and then bang, you're off, you're ready to proceed. You know, life isn't going to be super exciting and dynamic all the time. Sometimes there are those periods of calm, but you know what, there are things during that period. Pick up another qualification, do some I don't know, some volunteer work, learn about other worlds. And then there are big challenging moments when you take that big step, and it's being aware that both are fine. It's just different chapters in your life, isn't it? One thing that neither of you've mentioned, and has certainly been very helpful to me at various periods in my life when it's been there, not always, is a mentor, somebody that I can either inspires me or I can ask dumb questions to safely, and they'll help me find my way through tricky periods. Fawzi, have you ever benefited from a mentor in that way?
Absolutely. Yes, no, I didn't mention it, but definitely it's been important. I think there have been times where I didn't know I needed one, and I didn't have one, and I would have benefited from one. I think I used a mentor during my first sales job, and that really helped me adopt the mindset in order to be a good salesperson. And now that's something that I do now to give back. I talk to people who are earlier on in their career path and just tell them what I would have wanted to know when I was at their stage. But I think having a mentor, someone to challenge you, that's really what I find beneficial. Someone to say, well, why have you come up with that decision? What do you think is the best way to go forward? What about this other option? And then, and also just to give a little bit of confidence. Yeah, sometimes it is pretty bad, but we can get over it. That's kind of the benefit of having a mentor, to the encouragement.
It can be really powerful, and what about you, Mouhssin?
Yeah, loads. When I think back, again, I'm constantly looking to pick people's brains all the time, because I'm sure people have gone through and trodden the path that I'm doing now. So why bother trying to struggle through it myself when I can ask someone who's gone through it and expedite the learning as quickly as I can? And I think that's the way I think about these things. I think the other part of it is also not being. We talk about bold and being brave. I think those two words are not used enough, and I think we need to be bold and brave. And I'm just listening to the conversation that you and Fawzi were having just a moment ago on a different question. I think a lot of times in our careers, we're waiting for people to make opportunities for us. We're in organizations and we're saying they're going to recognize my talent and they're going to open a door for me, and then constantly looking to. And I think we need to be more bold and braver about what we want out of our own careers, and knocking on people's doors and not being ashamed or frightened to say that. And I think it's incumbent on people in leadership, in our positions, to be comfortable with people knocking on the door and seeing that as a good thing and trying to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And I think that's a responsibility that we have as well, not something that we should be frightened or threatened about. And when you run large organizations, mine's nowhere near as large as some of the other schools or the other ones, it's hard to know what everyone's dreams and ambitions and aspirations are. So we want to encourage people to be able to talk about what they want to do. And if they can't do it at your institution or your organization, then you should be comfortable in trying to facilitate their development and growth somewhere else, if that's what they want to do. And I think that's important. So everyone has the opportunity to live a fulfilling professional life.
Yeah, I think that's massively important. When I think about that knocking on doors as well, the first big door knocking I did was when I was still at UCL, funnily enough. I at that stage, I decided I wanted to go into the city and work as a derivatives trader, because at the time astrophysics was the whole thing. They wanted those kind of mathematics skills. I mean, I knew absolutely nothing about it. I literally bought a book, Banking for Dummies, I think. But my mum had sent me an article from the Sunday Times saying that these people earned loads of cash. Thought, right, I'll give it a go. And I wrote to lots of investment banks saying, look, give me a job 2 days a week. UCL were brilliant. They allowed me to pick my module. So astrophysics, some of it was nighttime work at the observatory. They allowed me to pick my module so that I could work in the city for 2 days a week while doing my studies at nighttime and in the other 3 days. And most of them said no, all bar one said no, but one investment bank, JP Morgan, said yes to me, and gave me that chance. And that he was the one that did that for me. So you're right, I agree, you're in a position, it might not have necessarily worked out long term for him, but it's giving people those legs up. And particularly, if you don't mind me just putting a little plea out for women here, women in particular, I think, those glass ceilings, we do not push that ladder away. You have a responsibility to help lift women up and people in other marginalised communities that don't perhaps have the same opportunities as you're doing in your school, Mouhssin, and help really fly that flag for them and give them that extra support if that's possible. I could keep asking loads of questions, but I'm just going to check in first of all with Andy to see if we've got any questions he's picked up from the audience, if there's anybody who would like to ask anything to others. Otherwise, I'll just keep going.
Thank you very much to the panel. That was really interesting and really great to hear your candid and honest take on what it takes to change careers. Heidi, at the moment, I don't see any questions in the chat, but does anyone want to just raise their hand and then you can come off mute to ask any questions to the panel?
We don't bite, I promise.
Yeah, I think if anyone doesn't want to have their question, sorry, say that again. If anyone wants to be anonymous, I think they have the option to do that, to send it directly to Andy. Yeah,
feel free to. If anyone doesn't have any questions, I'm more than happy to continue the conversation, but I myself have a question that I'd like to ask the panel, and it's around, Fawzi, what you were saying about doing a course right now, and I'd like to just hear, particularly Heidi and Mouhssin, what your thoughts are around upskilling and the importance to upskilling in today's, like if someone's going to be working for, say, 40, 45 years, how can they really identify what skills they are lacking and to make sure that they're upskilling throughout the duration of their career?
Shall I go first and then hand it to Mouhssin? I think always valuable. You know, I think we've heard that a lot tonight, continuous learning, continuous learning. Sometimes you acquire that just kind of on the job in life. You pick up skills that you didn't realize you would need or develop. And sometimes it can be more, you know, in Mouhssin's case, well, I'm going to go and get an education qualification. In the middle of in between and working in industry and becoming an MP, I decided I was going to be a barrister and picked up a GDL conversion. So I was, and I bought a pub to do that, to fund me through. That was a cracking idea. So I was doing my studies during the day and running a pub in the evenings. So I picked up a legal qualification. I won't bore with the reasons why it didn't pan out, but then I was an MP, knowing how the law works and how law is constituted was really helpful. So I think it's massively useful. And not least, as you say, because people are living longer, particularly if you've got a head for technology, that is where it's at, isn't it? So if you can keep ahead of the game and develop your skills, the way we work is constantly changing. So I think that's a massive advantage that people can give themselves.
Thanks, Heidi. Mouhssin, anything from your side?
I don't think I've got anything further to add, apart from the fact that, you know, in the roles that I'm in and other people are in, learning is part and parcel of it. You can't sort of sit and not be upskilling yourself or dealing with, you know, or grappling with the latest stuff. So on my desk, I was reading the new schools bill as part of the white paper. We've got to know all that stuff because it's important what's coming forward, and attending courses and CPDs to make sure that it's sector specific, so that you can advise and you can make sure that you are steering your ship in the right direction.
And being curious as well, if I could just add that, and Andy, sometimes learning that you hate something, it can be as powerful as learning, God, I really enjoy this. Or on that learning journey, you meet somebody or you learn an aspect that then leads you in a different direction. Don't be scared of that. You know, embrace learning and having your head and your heart turned by other things, because that's the joy of life.
Thank you. Anything to add, Fawzi? I've noticed that we have now had a couple of questions from the audience, but Fawzi, have you got anything to add on that before we move to the next question?
No, I'd rather hear what the people want to ask.
Yeah.
I just echo what everyone said.
So we've got a question here. What advice would you give to those located not in the UK, and about how to connect and the importance of networking? Does anyone?
Well, I can give a little bit about the importance of networking, and it is obviously trickier. Funnily enough, before we started this evening, we were all talking about how lockdown has affected all our industries and whether people were going back into the office. And we all, I think, pretty much agreed that face-to-face is, of course, the best. That's how you make those human contacts. But networking in any form, whether it's through LinkedIn, is very powerful, whether it's getting involved with initiatives, whether it's joining events like this, picking up contacts. And those people can be your mentors sometimes. I think networking is very, very important. But the first thing, and I think Mouhssin said it, was be brave. Reach out to people that can help you. If you show you're hungry, you show you're interested, then by and large, people will respond positively to that. And use every tool at your disposal: email, contacts, telephone, LinkedIn, social media, all of it.
Yeah, I would just add that a sensible approach would be, when you do reach, don't be afraid to reach out. Definitely do ask for very specific things rather than a general "I need help." Then you're going to be more receptive. I think answering the part about working in the UK, presumably you meant to work in the UK if you're not in the UK. You don't want to go through the whole interview process and find right at the end you aren't eligible for some reason. So I would be asking that question to the recruiter or whoever is managing the recruitment process. If you are in need of a visa, then find out if you can acquire one with them, or what other conditions you may need. And there's always the opportunity to work with a satellite office in a different country as a way to engage with the UK headquarter. So those are potential options you can consider.
Great. Anything to add on that, Mouhssin?
No, I think Heidi and Fawzi said it will definitely be bold and brave. I've emailed lots of people and even offered them money for their time. No one has ever said I'll take the money, but I think that just shows that you value their time and you're willing to pay for it. And I think
but don't do that with MPs.
No, I was going to say, and also to try to participate in as many events as possible because of the networking that you could make. Because Heidi and Fawzi don't know this yet, but I'm going to ask them at the end unashamedly whether they'd come to my school and give a talk. So if I didn't attend this, I won't be able to ask them. Now they may say no, but I hope they won't. But that's an opportunity for my students to hear two fantastic people.
Great that you put Heidi and Fawzi on the spot there, Mouhssin. But I think this leads actually into the next question from Coldy, which is around how would you go about finding a mentor? And that does lend itself into networking. So you talked about great mentors. How did you go about finding a great mentor?
Okay, well, I can answer that. It's not easy sometimes. I've asked people at organizations and they've said, no, I'm doing too many already. So you have to sometimes expect that no will be the answer. I think I have found that mentors also want something out of it, whether that's because they're doing their voluntary activity, or there's something I could add to them. So I had one mentor who didn't have the commercial mind that I had, but was in a much more senior position, so could see the how the organisation was working, could see the opportunities that were coming, and could advise me on, you know, who I should really speak to or what I should be doing to kind of really maximise myself. He recognised a limitation in himself. He saw the opportunity, and so if I could go back again, I would say, well, you know, the opportunity for you is also to get something that I can offer. So don't view it as I'm going to be taking this person's time and they're not going to get anything out of it. The value proposition, if I may use that term, is you're going to get something out of it, I'm going to get something out of it, and that's a fruitful relationship. If you can't find one in your organisation, then you may be able to find one in voluntary groups. You can volunteer and be a mentor to someone else, and through that organisation find someone who'd be prepared to give you something in return.
Shall I give you my 2 penneth? So I think there are maybe different types of mentor. So there can be those who say you really want to get into, you've made your mind up, as Mouhssin, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go. So there will be industry or sector experts, leaders, or people that are nearby you, a school nearby you, whatever it might be, that you don't know who they are, but you're going to find out the person in that job, in that locality, because you know they will have the expertise or the connections that you're after. Or I think, and ones that perhaps have influenced me more in my career, what I call behavioural mentors. So people that I just come across, flipping heck, they impressed me. God, they set me on fire. They made me feel like anything was possible. I'd love to be on their coattails and spend half an hour talking to them. So they might be more to do with your skills or your behaviours or your confidence levels or whatever it might be. So, you know, I think there can be different types. And, you know, don't be frightened, as we've all said, I think, to get in touch with them. It's actually quite flattering if somebody gets in touch with you and says, God, you really inspired me. Could I have half an hour of your time? Who wouldn't want to receive an email like that? Do be prepared for knockbacks, particularly if they're senior. There's probably, you know, 2 or 3 layers of secretaries and goodness knows what to get through. But, you know, it can be people who just inspire because the kind of person that they are, maybe totally unrelated industry, but they did something amazing that you'd like to learn from.
Thanks, Heidi. Mouhssin, anything to add on that before we go to the last question? No?
I think Heidi and Fawzi have said it all.
Fab. So we've got one question here. We've got time for one more, which is from Louise. What one action skill helped you the most when changing careers? Does anyone want to?
We're all in silence because that's a very good question. Would you mind repeating it, please?
Yep. What one action or skill has helped you the most when changing careers?
Can I just, I think I've got one thing for me, and one, not a skill, I think it's an attribute. I think it's being courageous, and we've mentioned that throughout the course of this. And I think what's helped me make the change is taking a leap of faith, believing in my ability and being courageous, and also understanding that I'm not going to know everything, but that's part of the journey and the enjoyment of it. And not allowing fear to dominate my thinking about what next step I'm going to take.
Go on, Fawzi.
Thank you. I would say the skill that I value most is being able to take criticism. I think I would say I wasn't confident enough to take criticism, and perhaps I lacked the emotional maturity to take it when I was a younger person. And now I definitely see the value. I don't think I'd be able to do half the things that I can do if I wasn't pushed. And I think sometimes that's perhaps people don't want to admit it, but taking the criticism to develop is really, really important. And we've mentioned politics a lot today, but you know, sometimes you come up with an idea, the idea is being attacked, not the person. And removing yourself, being objective is a skill that I wish I'd developed earlier.
Yeah, that's really smart, actually. Really smart. Because you take it really personally sometimes, don't you? And actually, it's not about that. which links to the confidence part, doesn't it? I guess that Mouhssin said. The bit I'd add to that is, yes, confidence and courage to go for it, but also to, and it's easier said than done, but have that self-belief that it isn't, oh, this isn't for me. No, that's what those people do. I can't do that. No, you are that person. Yes, there might be really technical skills. You know, don't try and blag it as a lawyer if you're an accountant. That could end badly, I would suggest. But broadly, you can. What, you know, I remember thinking at the time, why can't I be an MP? Government, that's what other people do. No, it's not. All of it is doable. You might be rubbish at it when you get there, or you might hate it. But everybody can be what they want to be, and just have that self-belief and equip yourself with the tools that you need to make it happen.
I think that's a fantastic point to end this event this evening, Heidi. My thanks hugely to the panel, to Heidi, to Fawzi, to Mouhssin. You've really inspired, you've certainly inspired myself this evening, but you've also inspired the attendees. Thank you for being really open and having a really wonderful discussion on career change.